Tom Reed never expected to find himself standing in the grand arena of the Star Federation's most prestigious gathering. The massive crystalline dome above him sparkled with the light of 3 suns, while thousands of alien spectators watched from their hovering platforms. Their whispers and clicks echoed through the chamber as they studied the lone human among the group of contestants. He was just a maintenance engineer who had been working on the Outer Rim colonies when his ship received the distress signal. That fateful decision to investigate had led him here, to the sacred competition grounds of the Ancient Ones, where the future leadership of the greatest alien civilization would be decided. The other contestants, tall, graceful beings with iridescent scales and sharp features, looked down at him with mixture of amusement and contempt. Tom could hardly blame them. In his worn work uniform and basic environmental suit, he must have looked absurdly out of place among their ceremonial armor and bio-enhanced battle gear. "The trials will begin shortly," announced the High Elder, her voice resonating through the chamber. "As tradition demands, all who seek to lead must first prove their worth through the sacred rites of courtship. Only the strongest, wisest, and most capable may earn the right to guide our people." Tom's throat went dry. He hadn't meant to enter this competition at all. When he'd helped repair the damaged systems in the ancient temple, the AI had registered his actions as a formal declaration of intent to participate. By their laws, backing out now would be seen as a grave insult to their culture, one that could spark a diplomatic incident with Earth. The first challenge was about to begin. Around him, the other contestants were already displaying their impressive abilities. One created swirling patterns of energy between her hands, while another shifted his form like living mercury. Tom had none of their enhanced abilities or advanced technology. All he had was his technical knowledge, quick thinking, and years of experience solving problems in the harsh conditions of space. "Contestants, prepare yourselves," the High Elder commanded. "The trial of perception begins now." The arena floor beneath them began to shift and transform. As holographic symbols and ancient machinery emerged from hidden chambers, Tom noticed something familiar about the patterns. They reminded him of the old maintenance systems he'd worked with on the Outer Rim. Perhaps his seemingly ordinary skills might prove more valuable than anyone expected. A slight smile crossed his face as he rolled up his sleeves. He might be the outsider here, but sometimes the most unexpected solutions came from thinking differently. As the first trial began, Tom Reed, the simple human engineer, prepared to show the Grand Assembly of the Star Federation exactly what humanity could bring to their ancient traditions. The other contestants might have their advanced technology and evolutionary advantages, but Tom had something they didn't: the uniquely human ability to adapt, improvise, and see patterns where others saw only chaos. As the symbols around him began to pulse with energy, he took a deep breath and stepped forward. The real challenge was about to begin. The trial of perception filled the arena with floating geometric shapes and pulsing light patterns. While the alien contestants immediately began manipulating the energy fields with their advanced abilities, Tom studied the ancient machinery emerging from the floor. Years of working with old space station systems had taught him to recognize patterns in seemingly chaotic systems. "Look at the primitive one," sneered a tall contestant named Bright Crystal. "He cannot even generate a basic energy field." The other competitors clicked in agreement, their attention focused on creating increasingly complex light displays. But Tom noticed something they didn't. The holographic symbols weren't random. They matched maintenance diagnostic patterns he'd seen in abandoned space stations. The ancient machines weren't just for show, they were part of a vast system that needed repair. While his competitors tried to overpower the trial with their abilities, Tom walked to a corroded control panel. His fingers moved quickly across the ancient interface, recognizing the universal engineering principles that hadn't changed even after thousands of years. "The human shows disrespect by ignoring the sacred light patterns," declared another contestant, Stormwing, her crystalline armor flashing with disapproval. The High Elder raised her hand for silence. "Each contestant may approach the trial as they see fit." Tom barely heard them. He'd found what he was looking for: a master system diagnostic panel. The entire arena was one massive machine, and all these light patterns were actually error messages. The Ancient Ones hadn't built this as a light show, It was a practical test of system understanding. With steady hands, he began the repair sequence. The floating shapes above started to align themselves. Other contestants paused their energy manipulations, watching in confusion as their elaborate displays were pulled into a new configuration. "Impossible!" Bright Crystal exclaimed. "The sacred patterns respond to his primitive touching of panels?" Tom continued working, using his basic engineering knowledge to guide the system's repairs. The holographic symbols transformed from chaos into order, forming a massive three-dimensional star map of the Federation's territory. At its center, a pulsing red light highlighted critical systems that needed attention. The High Elder's eyes widened. After 10,000 years, someone finally understands. The trial of perception was never about creating the most beautiful display. It was about seeing the true purpose behind the patterns. Gasps and murmurs filled the arena as the ancient machinery hummed to life, its systems fully operational for the first time in millennia. The star map showed vital trade routes, resource deposits, and potential dangers throughout the Federation's space, information that had been lost for generations. "In the time of our ancestors," the High Elder explained, "leaders were chosen not for their ability to impress, but for their skill in maintaining the systems that kept our civilization alive. The human has demonstrated this ancient wisdom." Tom wiped sweat from his forehead, still focused on fine-tuning the machinery. He hadn't set out to make a point, he'd just done what came naturally to him, fixing things that were broken. "The first trial is complete," announced the High Elder. "The human Tom Reed has succeeded beyond all expectations." She turned to address him directly. "But do not celebrate yet. The trial of strength approaches, and it will test more than your ability to repair ancient systems." As the other contestants glared at him with newfound wariness, Tom realized he'd just changed the game entirely. He might have passed the first trial, but he'd also made himself a target. The next challenge would require more than just technical skills, and his competitors would be ready for him this time. The arena transformed for the trial of strength, its smooth floor splitting open to reveal a deep pit filled with shifting metal platforms. Heat rose from glowing energy channels below, making the air shimmer. Tom's environmental suit immediately began beeping warnings about the extreme temperatures. "The trial of strength tests more than mere physical power," the High Elder announced. "Contestants must cross the Forge of Ancestors, retrieving 3 crystal cores from the platforms while avoiding the energy streams. Those who rely only on brute force often find themselves unsuccessful." Tom watched as Bright Crystal stepped forward first. The alien contestant leaped gracefully between platforms, his crystalline form glinting as he dodged energy beams. He retrieved the first crystal core easily, but reaching for the second, a sudden energy surge caught him off guard. He barely managed to shield himself, his elegant armor now scorched. Stormwing tried a different approach, using her ability to generate force fields to create bridges between platforms. She made it halfway across before multiple energy streams overwhelmed her defenses. She retreated, her crystalline armor smoking slightly. Other contestants attempted similar strategies, using their advanced abilities to force their way through. Some made progress, but none could retrieve all 3 cores without taking significant damage. When Tom's turn came, he didn't immediately jump in. Instead, he knelt at the edge of the pit, studying the energy flow patterns. His years maintaining reactor cores had taught him that energy, like water, followed predictable paths. "The human delays!" someone shouted from the crowd. "He fears to face the trial." Tom ignored them, continuing his observations. The energy streams weren't random, they were following a maintenance cycle, just like the cooling systems he'd worked with on deep space stations. There was a pattern to their pulses, a rhythm that could be predicted. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the first platform. Instead of trying to power through or create elaborate defenses, he moved in sync with the energy flows. When a stream pulsed left, he moved right. When the pattern indicated a surge coming, he waited. "What is this strange dance?" Stormwing asked, watching Tom's methodical progress. "He moves like one who reads the winds," the High Elder observed quietly. Platform by platform, Tom made his way across the forge. His movements weren't graceful like the aliens, but they were precise and calculated. He collected the first crystal core, then the second, timing each retrieval with gaps in the energy streams. The third core proved most challenging, positioned where multiple energy streams intersected. Tom studied the pattern, then noticed something familiar. The energy pulses matched the diagnostic rhythms from the first trial. The ancient ones had built their systems with consistent logic. Using this knowledge, he timed his final approach perfectly. Just as multiple streams diverted for a brief moment, a maintenance safety protocol he recognized, he grabbed the last core and made his way back. Reaching safe ground, Tom placed the 3 cores in the collection panel. His suit was barely singed, while most other contestants showed significant damage to their advanced armor and enhancement systems. Once again, the High Elder announced, "The human demonstrates understanding over force. The trial of strength is not about overpowering the forge, but working in harmony with its rhythms." Stormwing approached Tom, her earlier disdain replaced with curiosity. "You saw something in the energy patterns that we missed." "How?" "When you work with dangerous systems every day," Tom explained, wiping sweat from his face, "you learn to respect their power instead of trying to dominate them." The High Elder raised her hand for attention. "The final trial approaches, the trial of unity. It will test not just your individual capabilities, but your understanding of leadership itself." Her gaze lingered on Tom. "And it may prove the most challenging yet." Looking at the determined faces of his competitors, Tom knew she was right. He'd survived 2 trials using his practical knowledge, but leadership among aliens? That would require skills he wasn't sure he possessed. The trial of unity transformed the arena into a massive control center, with holographic displays showing various crises unfolding across the Star Federation. Emergency signals flashed from different sectors, each demanding immediate attention. "Your final challenge," the High Elder announced, "is to demonstrate true leadership. Multiple systems are failing across our territory. You must work together to prevent disaster. However, only one of you can coordinate the response. Choose wisely." The remaining contestants immediately began arguing about who should take command. Bright Crystal boasted of his noble lineage, while Stormwing cited her military experience. Others listed their achievements and abilities, their voices rising in competition. Tom stayed quiet, studying the emergency displays. He recognized several critical situations: a plasma reactor overload in one sector, life support failures in another, and a dangerous solar storm approaching a populated system. Each problem alone was manageable, but together they threatened to overwhelm the Federation's resources. "I suggest we split into teams," he finally spoke up. The others turned to stare at him. "These crises need different skills. We shouldn't waste time arguing about who's in charge. And who would lead these teams?" Bright Crystal challenged. "You. Actually," Tom pointed to Stormwing. "You have military experience with solar storms. You should handle the evacuation coordination." He turned to Bright Crystal. "Your energy manipulation abilities would be perfect for stabilizing the plasma reactor." The aliens looked surprised at being assigned roles based on their strengths rather than status. Stormwing tilted her head thoughtfully. "And what would you do, human?" "I'll coordinate from here. I've worked emergency response in space stations. The principles are similar. We need someone focusing on the big picture while you handle the specialized tasks." "Why should we follow your plan?" another contestant demanded. "Because we've already wasted 10 minutes arguing, and that plasma reactor won't wait much longer," Tom replied calmly. "We can keep debating, or we can start saving lives." The High Elder watched silently as the contestants looked at the worsening situation displays, then at each other. Finally, Stormwing stepped forward. "I accept the human strategy. The evacuation needs immediate attention." One by one, the others agreed. Tom quickly organized them into teams, matching their abilities to the most urgent problems. He set up communication channels and began coordinating their responses, drawing on his experience managing crisis situations in space. As the teams deployed, Tom noticed something in the data streams, a pattern similar to the previous trials. The crises weren't random, they were interconnected. The plasma reactor's instability was affecting the life support systems, which in turn complicated the evacuation efforts. "Stormwing," he called over the comm. "Delay the evacuation for 3 minutes. Bright crystal is about to stabilize the reactor, and the energy release could interfere with your ship's shields." "Understood," she replied, showing none of her earlier disdain. Holding position. Working together under Tom's coordination, the teams began making progress. The reactor was stabilized, life support restored, and the evacuation completed just before the solar storm hit. What had seemed like overwhelming chaos became manageable through proper organization and teamwork. As the emergency signals turned green one by one, the High Elder raised her hand. "The trial of unity is complete. Through this challenge, true leadership reveals itself, not in commanding others, but in bringing out their best qualities for the common good." The other contestants gathered around Tom, their earlier hostility replaced with respectful acknowledgement. Even Bright Crystal gave a slight bow. "You led without demanding to be followed," he admitted. Perhaps there is wisdom in the human way." But Tom barely heard the praise. Something about the trial's interconnected problems had triggered a realization about the entire competition. As he looked up at the High Elder, he saw in her eyes that the greatest test was still to come, and it would challenge everything he thought he understood about leadership in the Star Federation. As the emergency simulations faded from the arena's displays, Tom's mind raced with his recent realization. All 3 trials had been connected: the ancient diagnostic systems, the energy patterns in the forge, and now these coordinated crises. They weren't just tests, they were pieces of a larger puzzle. The High Elder stepped forward, her crystalline form catching the light of the 3 suns overhead. "The trials are complete. The human, Tom Reed, has shown exceptional performance in each challenge. However, before we proceed with the final ceremony, does any contestant wish to speak?" Tom raised his hand. The crowd murmured in surprise. No one had ever interrupted the traditional progression to the victory ceremony. Stormwing and Bright Crystal exchanged concerned glances. "Speak, human," the High Elder said, her tone curious. "The entire competition is one connected system, isn't it?" Tom began. "The diagnostic patterns from the first trial matched the energy flows in the forge. Those same rhythms appeared in the crisis scenarios. This isn't just about choosing a leader, it's about understanding how your civilization actually works." A hush fell over the arena. The High Elder's eyes gleamed with interest. "Continue. In the first trial, we had to see the patterns. In the second, we had to work with them instead of fighting them. And in the third, we had to coordinate others to manage them." Tom pointed to the ancient machinery still visible around the arena. "Your entire federation is built on these interconnected systems. The real test isn't about who's the strongest or smartest, it's about who understands that everything is connected." "Very perceptive," the High Elder nodded. "But what conclusion do you draw from this?" Tom looked at his fellow contestants. "I don't think any single person is meant to lead the Federation alone. The trials aren't about finding one supreme leader, they're about finding someone who understands the need for cooperation and balance." Bright Crystal stepped forward. "But our traditions demand a single victor to guide us. Do they?" Tom asked. "Or is that just how recent generations have interpreted the trials?" He turned to the High Elder. "The ancient systems I repaired in the first trial, they were designed to be maintained by multiple operators working in harmony, weren't they?" The High Elder's expression brightened. "For 10,000 years, we have held these trials seeking one perfect leader. For 10,000 years, each victor has struggled to manage the Federation alone, never fully succeeding. And now, a human from beyond our space sees what we have forgotten." She raised her hands, and the arena's systems came alive once more. The diagnostic patterns, forge energy, and crisis scenarios all appeared simultaneously, forming an intricate web of light and data. "Our ancestors built the Federation on principles of cooperation and balanced leadership. But over time, pride and ambition twisted the meaning of the trials. The High Elder turned to address all contestants. The human speaks truth. True leadership in our Federation was never meant to rest with one being. Stormwing moved to stand beside Tom. Then what is the real purpose of these trials? To find those who understand the fundamental truths of our civilization, the High Elder explained. Those who can see the patterns, work with them, and bring others together in harmony. Not to rule alone, but to form a council of complementary strengths. The implications of this revelation rippled through the arena. Generations of tradition were being re-examined in a new light. The other contestants gathered around, their earlier rivalry forgotten as they began to understand the true meaning of their ancient heritage. But as Tom watched the High Elder's knowing smile, he sensed that one final challenge remained. Understanding the truth was one thing, implementing such a massive change to their civilization would be another. The real test of leadership was about to begin. The arena hummed with tension as the High Elder prepared to make her final proclamation. The ancient systems pulsed with harmonious energy, reflecting the newfound understanding that Tom had unveiled. But not everyone was ready to accept such dramatic change. "This is heresy!" shouted a voice from the audience. A tall, elderly alien rose from the dignitary section, his ceremonial armor marking him as a former victor. "For countless generations, we have chosen single leaders through these trials. Would you destroy our traditions based on a human's interpretation?" Murmurs of both agreement and disagreement rippled through the crowd. Tom noticed Stormwing and Bright Crystal moving to stand beside him, while other contestants formed a loose circle around them, not in confrontation, but in unity. "Tell me, honored former victor," the High Elder addressed the protester. "In your time as leader, did you not struggle with the overwhelming burden of sole responsibility? Did you not wish for others who truly understood the complexities of our systems to share the weight of leadership?" The elderly alien's defiant posture softened slightly. "The burden was considerable," he admitted. Tom stepped forward. "I never came here seeking to lead," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet arena. "I'm just a maintenance engineer who saw patterns that looked familiar. But maybe that's exactly why I could see what generations of noble leaders missed, because I'm used to working as part of a team, not trying to control everything alone." He gestured to his fellow contestants. "Look at how we succeeded in the trial of unity. Stormwing's military experience, Bright Crystal's energy manipulation, everyone's unique abilities. We accomplished more together than any one of us could have done alone. Isn't that what a federation should be?" Stormwing raised her voice. "The human speaks wisdom. Our strength has always been in our diversity, yet we've tried to channel all authority through a single leader. Perhaps this is why we've struggled to maintain the ancient systems our ancestors built. The trials themselves show us the truth," Bright Crystal added, surprising everyone with his support. "Each challenge required different skills, different approaches. No single being could master them all perfectly." The High Elder nodded approvingly. "The human did not break our traditions, he helped us understand them correctly. The final test was never about the trials themselves, but about recognizing this greater truth." She spread her arms wide. "From this day forward, the Federation will be led by a council, chosen through the trials not for their individual supremacy, but for their ability to work in harmony for the good of all." She turned to Tom. "You have done more than win the trials, human. You have helped us reclaim the wisdom of our ancestors. Will you accept a place on this new council? We would benefit from your unique perspective." Tom looked around at the beings who had begun as his competitors and now stood as allies. "I would be honored," he said, "but only if my role is clear. I'm not here to lead alone or to impose human ways. I'm here to help maintain the connections between systems and people, just like I've always done." "Well spoken," the High Elder declared. "Let it be recorded that on this day, the Star Federation entered a new era. Not through revolution or force, but through understanding and wisdom brought by an unexpected source." She smiled at Tom. Sometimes the greatest innovations come from seeing old truths through new eyes. As the ceremony concluded, Tom stood with his fellow council members, watching the three suns set through the crystal dome. What had begun as an accidental entry into an alien mating ritual had evolved into something far more significant, a transformation that would ripple through the galaxy. Stormwing approached him. You know, for a simple maintenance engineer, you've managed to perform quite remarkable maintenance indeed, not just on our systems, but on our entire civilization. Tom smiled. Sometimes the most important repairs weren't to machines at all, but to the connections between those who operated them. As he looked out at the stars appearing in the darkening sky, he wondered what other ancient wisdom waited to be rediscovered, and what other boundaries waited to be crossed between humanity and the vast, complex galaxy they were becoming part of.